Excellent. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jody Giannakopoulos. I'm an Adult Services Associate here at Addison Public Library in Addison, Illinois. And I'm here with Laura Winnie from DuPage County Animal Services for part 2 of our 4-part series, Understanding Animal Behavior. And today we have a couple of really purposeful, meaningful topics that Laura's going to tell us about. And I will allow her to introduce that program. But really quickly, just a heads up, we are going to be same place, same time next Tuesday, 11 a.m. live on YouTube streaming, but as well on this Zoom, which you are more than welcome to register for. You just go to addisonlibrary.com or .org and fill in your information, and we will send you a link to this program. But otherwise, we're just hoping that you catch this information when you can. So without further ado, thank you so much, Laura. Looking forward to today.
Hi.
I'll be seeing you at the end.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. So today we're going to be talking about a couple of things that are very near and dear to my heart. Basically, we're going to be talking about how we can use our voting dollars, and I'll go into more about what that means, but how we can do good for animals both near and far. We're actually going to start with the animals that are further away from us. We're going to talk about our Compassionate Citizen crash course. And then the second part of the program, we're going to talk about neighbors that we find right in our backyard here in Chicagoland. So when I talk about compassionate citizenry, what do I mean by that? Well, there are a couple different things to keep in mind. We want to make sure that we are protecting animals from suffering and cruelty. We want to strive for sustainability because that's going to be the best way to make sure that we are using the resources that we need, but also providing spaces and resources for the animals as well. When we're out and about, we want to make sure that we are leaving no trace behind. This is a great philosophy. Anytime you're out in a natural setting, thinking about not just our trash, but also the impact of what we're doing in those environments to try to have as little influence on those wild animals as possible. Human populations are growing and expanding into completely new geographic areas. And so we are coming into closer and closer contact with wild and domestic animals. When I talk about domestic, I mean both our pets that live in our houses, but also livestock that we use for our daily needs, for food, for clothing, for sport, education, companionship. And keeping close contact with these animals and their environment, it does provide a more opportunity for transmission of diseases. So the One Health Initiative through the CDC has looking at how can we provide the balance for these animals, looking at the movement of the people, the animals, and the animal products to make sure that the health of the animals, the health of our environment, and our own health are all in that balance, because if one gets out of whack, it's going to really affect the other ones. So we're going to talk more about this later on when we talk about factory farms. That's a big, big issue in today's world, and also environmental concerns. So the idea that we are separate, you know, if you don't live on a farm, then you're not affected by it, is just not the case. We are all affected by all of these things that connect us, and understanding how we can use our humane philosophies, looking back at protecting animals from suffering and cruelty and looking at those sustainable practices, will help us overall have a healthier planet, because after all, this is what we have. And we want to make sure that we are sustaining it, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. So first, we're going to dive into voting with our wallet. The idea that every single transaction is a vote. When you pick a product, you are voting, yes, I like this product. as opposed to all the other versions of it on the shelf. And understanding how much voting power we have with the money we spend is a huge deal. We have an insane amount of power with the money that we use. So more than 100 million credit card purchases every day. And that's just in our country. So every day, over 100 million credit card purchases. And when you think about it, very rarely is a credit card purchase just for one thing, right? So when you go to the grocery store, you are voting not just one time with your credit card purchase, but for every individual thing you buy, you are voting. If you don't buy a product, the companies will change it to get it so that you will, okay? If anybody here remembers purple ketchup, they don't make that anymore because it was disgusting, right? It tasted the same, but nobody wanted purple goo on their hot dogs except like really, really small children. And guess what? The small children don't have the purchasing power, okay? So that's gone because as a society, we decided purple ketchup is absolutely disgusting. Nope, we're not going to buy it. So they stopped making it. When we are looking at what we put our money towards, that's going to help determine what companies offer us in the future. And that goes towards not just the product itself, but also the packaging that it's in. We'll talk more about that later on. But we do want to be careful about greenwashing tactics because companies know that we are more interested in sustainable products, that this is something that is becoming very, very popular with consumers. They tend to make it look like a product is eco-friendly or green without actually doing the work behind it. So they might do broad claims, 100% natural. Okay, great. What does that mean? You know, eco-friendly. How is it eco-friendly? You want to look for specific details. Also, sometimes they will even just make the packages look eco-friendly. They'll use blues and browns and greens to make you think that you're using a more sustainable product. Look for specific details. You know, this product is made of 50% recycled materials. Great. Okay, that is something that's very specific, and they would have to have the information to back that up. You could also look for certified products. Green Seal is a great one. So anything through them has been checked to make sure that not only the product is green, but also the manufacturing of it and the transportation is living up to different standards within the industry. So it can get a little overwhelming. I completely understand. Take it a step at a time. You know, when you're out and about and you're looking for, oh, I need to buy new sponges. Okay, this trip we're going to focus on finding the best eco-friendly sponges. You know, we're going to avoid the ones that have plastic in them that can deteriorate and go down the sink. We're going to be looking at natural fiber sponges. Perfect. All right, just take it one step at a time. You don't have to try to overhaul your life all at once. That is not realistic, and I completely understand that. So one product at a time is going to be helpful. You know, even looking for different companies that you can follow and what they're doing with their sustainability efforts is going to help you determine, is this a company that I want to follow into the future? Now, when we are looking at entertainment possibilities, we definitely want to look into responsible travel, because when we are out and about, especially if you're going down south into the Caribbean, there are lots of options for interacting with animals, and you want to make sure that those animals are being treated humanely. So looking for the Association of Zoos and Aquariums certification or the Humane certification is going to be key to understanding is, are these animals that are providing entertainment for humans, are they being kept in humane conditions? Are they making sure that the places are using their money for education and conservation efforts, as opposed to just trying to make a buck off the backs of these animals? So looking at different places, both locally and abroad, when we do travel abroad, is going to be very, very helpful, because we definitely don't want to put our money towards organizations that mistreat their animals for the sake of profit. So there are definitely organizations that you can look at that do have those high standards, and they will give you a list of where you're going. So you can go to the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, put in where you're traveling to, and they'll give you a list of certified zoos that you can visit with your family. When we're looking at traveling options as well, the Global Sustainable Tourism Council looks at especially hotels and restaurants that follow sustainable practices. And overall, those sustainable practices are going to have a better impact on the environment and overall help the wildlife in those areas. So I highly recommend that you check those out. Now, a lot of times we hear about, oh, don't waste food, don't waste food, don't waste food. Absolutely. The clean your plate movement from at least all the mothers that I knew growing up, oh, don't waste that food. There was a lot of resources put into bringing that food to your plate. Absolutely. It's important to understand what you're going to consume, when you're going to consume, and making sure that we're not just throwing good food down the garbage. But what those narratives leave out is how much food is wasted before we ever even see it. 10 billion animals are raised annually in the US for food. Factory farms cause a lot of waste and pollution. They also really degrade resources in the area. So they'll clear lands, they'll pollute the waters, they pollute the air, and they are one of the causes of climate change, right? All of that methane going into our environment is significantly changing our environment. So understanding that these factory farms are not just detrimental and unhumane to the animals, but they are also detrimental to the environment is very important. On the other end of that, even looking at plant-based distribution, a lot of stuff gets wasted or thrown away from the packaging end, whether the food isn't pretty enough to sell in our grocery stores. If a carrot is curved or, knotted, or it just looks a little gross, it gets thrown away. It's not sold because it doesn't look like a carrot. There are lots of organizations that work with ugly food to make sure that it's not just being thrown away. And also, our grocery stores and our packaging facilities waste an insane amount of food every single year. So 52 billion pounds of food just goes right into the garbage every year. And that's not, from our refrigerators, that's before it even reaches us. If it was a country, if all of that wasted food was a country, it would be the third largest producer of greenhouse gases, because that food goes into a landfill and it decomposes and it releases all that carbon, all those toxins into the air. Okay. So understanding what our grocery stores can do to combat this is important as well. So we do have the slow road to zero. So the idea is zero waste by our distributors. Kroger owns Mariano's, and then Albertsons owns Jewel Osco. So you can see that Kroger's is doing pretty good. They have initiatives in place that they are working towards that will decrease the amount of food waste from the store. Meijer just launched a program they're not on this list, but they just launched a program called Flash Food. And it's an app that tracks food near its expiration date and then offers them at a deep discount. So this is a great program that, one, prevents food waste, and two, can help those in our community who may not be able to afford food at its full price to be able to make sure that they are getting healthy, nutritious food and that we're not having things wasted. My my grocery store back home in Missouri had something similar to this. It wasn't an app, it was just a section of the grocery store. And my dad always called it the eat today or die section. And he loved it. He was a bargain shopper from way back. And so he thought this section was great. And it's wonderful to see that we're getting programs like this more tech savvy, more into the hands of people who need it so that we can avoid that food waste. Now, as I mentioned before, factory farms are very inhumane. They have very inhumane conditions, and they're factories. They're factories for food. And what you need to understand is that a lot of the companies that run these do not see the animals as animals. They are a product, and they treat them as a product. They do not pay attention or take into consideration, the needs for their health. They are trying to maximize production and profit. So that's for meat, milk, and eggs. There are many, many studies, and there are many, many videos. I did not put any in the presentation because they are very jarring and they can be very upsetting to see how these animals are treated in these conditions. They will often be maimed. So birds, chickens who are, clustered together, all closely together, like you see in this picture, will be debeaked. So they will actually have their beaks sheared off of their faces so that they do not peck their neighbors out of frustration because of the cramped living conditions that they are in. Baby animals are separated very, very quickly from their mothers, which can cause distress to these animals. Extreme confinement. So battery cages has made the rounds of the news many times, where you just have wire cages stacked on top of each other, and any animals at the top, when they eliminate or defecate, that just all flows downhill to all the other animals below them. These animals are bred for maximum growth, so often they are unable to perform basic natural tests because their genetics have been managed to increase, for example, with turkeys and chickens, breast size, so that they are actually off kilter when they walk because they have been genetically bred to increase that breast size, and their legs cannot really support that weight anymore. So that is a very sad thing to see, because these animals are no longer even able to perform their natural behaviors. Now, when I talked about the battery cages, I do want to point out something in this photo that you're seeing. You don't see any cages here. So we're going to talk about labels next, but one thing I want you to look at here, this is not a humane living condition, but I am sure that on the packaging for, I believe this is an egg farm, on the packages for these eggs, it says cage free, which sounds great, right? It sounds like great living. Oh, great, these animals aren't in cages. But this qualifies for cage free, and I think we can all agree that these are definitely not ideal living conditions for these chickens. So we want to make sure that when we are looking for our humane options, that we pay attention to our labels. But even better than that is supporting our local farms. Local farms that we can actually go and visit, where we can see what the conditions are, is going to be fabulous. And we are very lucky here in Illinois to have a program called Crate Free Illinois. It's an app, and you can go on there and find local farms, and even farms that are a little further away but provide shipping. So you can get humanely raised animal products shipped right to your door, and you know that they have been vetted, that they have met these standards, that these animals are being treated with care and compassion, that they are getting a freedom of choice. So that means, can they go outside? Do they have that option? So when the weather's nice, do they have the option to go outside or stay inside? So agency with our animals is always going to be the humane choice there. And then natural diets. So they're not just being force-fed things to increase breast size or whatever it is, or those hormones that can cause some issues. Those natural diets are going to be the best thing for the animal to make sure that they are as comfortable as possible. So when we look at these labels in our grocery stores, making sure that we're looking at certified, humane, raised, and handled, or animal welfare approved. Those are going to be the ones that you're looking for humanely treated animals. So organic does not mean humane. Organic simply talks about the use of hormones and pesticides, things like that. Okay, it has absolutely nothing to do with living conditions. Cage-free, just like that picture we saw, that was cage-free. It doesn't have battery cages, but it doesn't mean that the chickens are out all happy out in a meadow or anything like that. So looking for the certified humane and the animal welfare approved, those are going to be your best options when looking for things, looking for places and companies that treat their animals humanely. Now, obviously, the most humane option would be to go with a completely vegan diet, just completely eliminating animal products out of your daily life. It is not realistic for most people. Completely understand that. And what I don't think a lot of people understand is that even avoiding animal products for one day, so the Meatless Mondays movement, one day can create such an impact. So just by cutting back on our consumption of animal products, we can save so much. Now, why Meatless Mondays? I mean, obviously it sounds good, right? Better than Meatless Thursdays. Just sounds really good. And it was first introduced during World War I, not necessarily as a humane initiative, but as a way to save and ration for soldiers. Okay, so it was revived in the early 2000s as a public health initiative because people who focus more on a plant-based diet have less risk of cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes, all these things that consuming animal products too much can cause. And it's been adopted in communities in over 40 countries around the world, this Meatless Mondays, because the idea is that if you start off your week with this lifestyle choice, with this animal product free day, it's a fresh week. It's a fresh start, right? It's a fresh start to your week. And it does start that healthy beginning, does reduce the risks of certain diseases that are linked with consuming too many animal products, but also it has a great positive impact on the environment and also on the lives of these animals. So when we're looking at how things are produced, it's very wasteful for something to be you lose a lot of the productivity of these resources. So if you are just consuming the plant, then that's where the buck stops, right? But if you are consuming an animal that has to eat the plants, then that's multiple tiers of resources that are being used. So when we look at this chart, you can see that 1,000 gallons of water every day is saved, 45 pounds of grain, 30 square foot of forest, because remember we did talk about those factory farms will often just completely wipe out a landscape to put up these buildings. And we are also saving all of that carbon dioxide from being released into the environment, plus the life of the animal. So understanding how we can balance our desires and our needs with the needs of these animals, with the needs of our environment, is going to, again, promote that one health, making sure that we are all staying in balance and preventing disease transmission and keeping our earth sustainable for the future. So going directly into environmental stewardship, the idea is that we don't want to continually add more and more and more and more. And we don't want to just take and take and take and take. We want to have that balance of what we're adding, what we're removing. Again, the idea is sustainability so that it evens out over the course of our lifetime. So one of the most popular ways to do good for the environment is through recycling. And there's a little bit lost in translation when we talk about recycling. A lot of people think, okay, well, I bought this plastic water bottle, it's fine. I'll just recycle it. Clean slate, breaks even, we're good. What's not always understood is that recycling is not the end all solution. If it was, we would not be in the situation that we are in currently, because especially for plastic cannot be recycled over and over and over again. Glass can be. So glass containers can be used and recycled, recreated over the course of many, many lifetimes. It can be reused, reused, reused. Plastic, however, cannot. It can typically only be recycled once or twice. So that plastic water bottle that you use and put in the recycling bin, a year from now, it's not going to be back on the shelf as a bottle of water. Okay, that's just not how the recycling industry works. Instead, typically it is transformed into something else. So if you've ever seen those heavy duty plastic like picnic tables, or you've seen the shirts made out of plastic bottles, that's what happens to your plastic bottle. It does not become a new plastic bottle. It becomes a completely different product. And there are no programs to recycle shirts, okay? There's no way that we can take our t-shirt that was made from plastic bottles and then turn that into a company that makes it into something else. Typically, once that shirt has worn out, that's it. It goes into the landfill, into the road for recycling that. Same with those plastic picnic benches. Once one of those breaks, that's it. There's no option to recycle it. You can repair it, of course, but that's it. That's the end of the road. It goes into the landfill again. So the first thing with our 4 R's is refuse, then reduce, then reuse, then recycle. Recycle is at the bottom for a reason, okay? Because that should be our last option when we're looking at how to repurpose these products. The first one is refuse. So again, with our consumer dollars, when we are voting for the products, you also vote for the packaging. Look for sustainable options. There are many different grocery stores around the world that will let you use reusable bags, okay? Those are great options. Or even for those of us who buy produce, you can have reusable mesh bags to put your produce in at the grocery store instead of using those single-use plastic bags. When you're at a restaurant, bring your own containers. It's really dorky, but really fun at the same time, because then you know like what you have and how you can fit. And you also know that they'll be leak proof, because a lot of those restaurant containers can, if they tip a little bit, they'll leak anyway, because they're not the greatest, especially that styrofoam. So bringing your own eliminates that potential mess and also reduces the use of that product. When you are out and about, you can always talk to the restaurants about if you're taking your food to go and you're bringing it right home. I know during the pandemic, most of us got our to-go food that way. Restaurants would still throw in that plastic silverware, right? And then when we got home, you either threw it in a drawer and forgot about it with the 100 other pairs of disposable silverware, or you just threw it away. So talking to your restaurant when they're packaging up your food and be like, oh, no, please don't give me silverware. I'm going to go right home where I have silverware. It's fine. And just understanding that a lot of the stuff that we just toss and don't think about, we can stop it from coming to us in the first place. We can refuse it. Junk mail is a great example. If you're getting catalogs from someone who lived in your house 15 years ago, call the company, tell them, hey, I don't want these catalogs anymore. and they can remove you from the list. That's just one way that we can reduce the waste that we are generating in our own homes. Another thing that we can look at in our homes is little steps. Now, little steps can take us a long way. They are not the end all be all, but every individual step does matter. And looking at how we can have sustainability in our homes is very important. So turning off equipment when we're not using it, turning off those lights when you leave a room, choosing energy efficient light bulbs, appliances when you're purchasing new items for your home, saving water. So turning off the tap when you brush your teeth, you know, those basic things we learned as kids, they do make a difference. And there are really fun ways that you can save water that you may not have thought about. So when you are boiling eggs or vegetables or something like that, you can take the water that you used, even pasta, put it aside, let it cool down, and water your houseplants with it. There are extra nutrients in the water that can benefit your houseplants, and then you're saving water. So it works, benefits for a couple ways. Lowering our shades, especially on hot summer days like we've had over the past couple weeks, to prevent that sun from coming in. We'll make sure that our AC doesn't have to work as hard. Clotheslines are a great way to save on energy. Even in the cold, as long as the air is not humid, your clothes will dry if they are outside. You can also find really cool things that you can string in your laundry room and just dry them right inside. The sun does a great job, though, of cleaning things and making it smell very nice and fresh. So I highly recommend that. All these different options are available to us. And again, I know it can get overwhelming, but just focusing on one thing at a time. So change one habit. So from now on, let's say like, okay, from now on, I'm going to make sure that when I purchase batteries, I get the rechargeable kind instead of this disposable kind. Perfect. Okay, let's focus on that first. There's all sorts of ways that we can make these small steps inside our home. In our garden, less is more. So the fewer chemicals that we use, the better. Collecting rainwater so that we're watering our garden using naturally available water, and also looking at what we have in our lawn. Lawns can be fairly wasteful when it comes to resources, especially during times of drought. Understanding when we should water our lawns and how much, because for the most part, Americans overwater their lawns. They do not need to be watered every single day. And typically we want to make sure that we're watering them early in the morning or late in the evening so that all that water just doesn't evaporate during the hot day. You can even look at water irrigation systems. There are pipelines that can be strung along the bottom of your gardens with little drip things so that the water isn't just going on the leaves and being evaporated, but it goes right to the roots where it needs to go. And putting your waste to work. So composting. There are many different programs throughout our area that offer composting services. And you can also have a compost bin on your own. Turn that organic waste into soil enriching material for your garden. We also want to look at what we're providing for our natural environment here. So having native plants for our pollinators is going to be very, very important. Bees are still threatened in the world. They are still struggling. There are many reasons for that. One of them is a lack of natural pollination plants, pollinators. So making sure that we're providing those for our animals. So when you have those dandelions, when you have that clover first pop up in the spring, don't just get rid of them right away, because that's the first thing that our pollinators are going to be looking for, our bees and our butterflies. And until there are other flowers that are available to them, that's it. So, keep those dandelions for a little bit until other flowers bloom to provide them sustenance. Now, all those little steps are great. However, individual actions are only going to take us so far. So making sure that we vote, not just with our money, but with our actual elected officials. So supporting conservation groups that advocate for animals and for the environment, contacting our officials when there are important issues up, and making sure that we are voting for these issues. You can track legislation through Legiscan and GovTrack. They have keyword searches that you can put in, just wildlife, environment, to make sure that anything important is, if it's in committee, if it's, been assigned, or if it's getting ready for a vote with our officials, then you can contact those officials and let them know, hey, I support this. And we can do only so much with our individual votes, with our individual voting dollars. But our government legislation can do a lot more. So the example that I use is back in the 70s, DEET was used to wipe out mosquito populations, and it was great. Everybody loved it. Everybody was using it. It was perfect. It got rid of mosquitoes, but then they realized that it was causing issues for animals higher up the food chain, especially bald eagles. So bald eagle shells were getting thinner and thinner and thinner, and those baby birds were not surviving because DEET was causing so many issues for their shells. They put in legislation, they banned DEET, the bald eagle population sprang back. So on an individual basis, yes, we could have said, oh, no DEET, but it was the legislation that made the difference there and brought those bald eagle populations back. So something to keep in mind. Yes, it's very important for us to look at our individual actions, but we also need to look at the bigger picture as well. So moving on from animals far away from us, let's look at some of what we can do for the animals in our area and how we can live peacefully together. So we get a lot of calls at DuPage County Animal Services for, I found this, what do I do to help it? And sometimes, absolutely, human intervention is needed. Sometimes it's not, and intervening would cause more harm than good. So let's look at a couple of different things to understand the difference. So when we are looking at an animal, it's very important to understand when they need our help. Examples are injured, stuck, or ill. Okay, that's definitely something that you want to call in, even if it's something that you think, oh, I might be able to manage it myself. Definitely call it in to either us, Willowbrook Wildlife Center, your local police department to get advice. They may be able to help. They may just be able to provide guidance on what to do. If you see an animal that is deceased, that it was maybe hit by a car, has severe injuries, we definitely want to call that in. If the animal is trapped, or it just kind of looks trapped, you're not sure, you definitely don't want to just cut it loose and let it go, because it probably needs to be assessed to make sure that there isn't some injury going on. So in the picture here, you can see this fawn got stuck in a fence. Animals that are afraid and panicked, and they definitely will be if they're stuck and approached by strangers, they can hurt us. That deer could kick really, really hard. So in a situation like that, definitely best to leave it up to the professionals, because then they can also see if the animal needs to be brought in for care. If you see an animal that is affected by mange, that we have a coyote picture there. So mange is a parasite that causes irritation on the skin and causes fur loss. Over time, it does eventually prove fatal, and that is tracked by the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. So you definitely want to call that in if you see it, because they track mange. That's not something that you necessarily want to handle on your own, because Anytime that you're dealing with mange, it can be treated, but it needs to be treated by professionals. Okay, that's not something that the average citizen is going to be able to manage on their own. Looking at these other pictures, trapped in garbage, these are definitely instances where you want a professional. For example, Willowbrook Wildlife Center can assist with these animals, because trying to cut them out of these containers could cause them more harm if you're not doing it properly. So an animal can be, knocked out for a couple hours so that they can be properly treated, have the plastic cut off them, have their wounds treated, and then they can be assessed and released back into the wild. So definitely want to make sure that we are paying attention to situations where our intervention is going to cause the animal more harm. There are several illnesses that you might see out in the community with some animals. Distemper is very, very common in raccoons and skunks. And typically when someone thinks that they have a rabid skunk, there's some similarities with how the symptoms present, but rabies is mostly seen in bats in our area. Actually, over the past couple decades, all cases of rabies have been from bats. None have been from any other mammals. So typically you're going to be looking at distemper. Now, distemper is not dangerous to humans. However, it can be transmitted to our domestic pets. So we do want to make sure that an animal with distemper is taken in. It is a fatal disease and it is a very painful disease. So typically we want to make sure that those animals are humanely euthanized so that they are not suffering unnecessarily and that they are not potentially spreading the disease to other animals. So with distemper, you're going to be looking at discharge from the eyes. Sometimes their eyes can get so bad they're actually like sealed shut, like glued shut. Uncoordinated twitchy movement, weakness or paralysis, and those seizures. So a lot of times we see that and we think rabies, but it is really distemper. So I do have a short video here that we can look at. So this is a young raccoon that was affected with distemper. You can see the twitching. Now, it does look like they cleaned up its eyes, probably for the camera. So typically you would also see quite a bit of pus or discharge from the eyes, but you can see just the muscle spasms, the twitches. This video does get a little disturbing, so I'm going to cut it off. This animal was brought into a vet center, not a local one, it was somewhere else in the country, and was videotaped for educational purposes and then was humanely euthanized because, as I said, it is a very painful disease and there is no cure. So when we see animals exhibiting this kind of behavior, we definitely want to call that in because we don't want the animals to suffer unnecessarily. Now, what about rabies? Because that's a big call that we get about a lot. Now, they do have similar symptoms. People get them confused. And it's when you see animals acting abnormal, that's what people think. Like, oh, the animal must have rabies. But there are a lot of normal behaviors that people think are abnormal. So, for example, an animal out during the day, perfectly fine. Okay. Any animal can be out during the day, does not mean it has rabies or distemper. It just means it's out during the day. Now, while a lot of these animals tend to be more nocturnal, like our skunks, our raccoons, our coyotes, our foxes, if there is food available during the day, so for example, if it's trash day and we've set all of our really good smelling garbage on the curb in the morning, waiting for the trash guy to come pick them up, then the animals are going to be attracted to those smells and come and get their smorgasbord. Okay, so when you have the raccoons and the skunks going after your garbage, then the things that eat them, the foxes and the coyotes, are also going to be attracted to the area during the day. So just to reemphasize, it is okay for animals to be out during the day. If that's all you see, an animal existing in the daylight, perfectly fine. Okay, it's when you're looking at for these other symptoms. Okay, so rabies is caused by a virus, and it can cause those muscle twitches, it can cause those seizures and paralysis, and then that foaming of the mouth because they are salivating very, very frequently and they are unable to control it. That's when you see the foaming of the mouth. So it attacks the central nervous system. Once you see symptoms, it is fatal. And it can be contracted by almost all mammals. There are a few that are less likely to have it, like possums. Their body temperature is not really a good host for the virus, does not thrive there. So typically you're not going to see it. Bats are the most prevalent carriers in our area. So if you have a bat inside your house, inside your living space of your house, I'm not talking about the attic, I'm not talking about the garage, I'm talking about where people are living, sleeping. If there is a bat in your house, it's very important that we call that in because we want to get the bat tested. Bats can have very, very small bites. You may not even notice it, especially if you have pets, children, sleeping people. They may come in contact with the bat, not even realize that they've been bitten. And we need to get that bat tested for rabies to make sure that everybody stays safe. Because what's great is if somebody has an exposure to rabies, if a person has exposure to rabies, then, and we get the animal and we test it, we know about it, and we treat it, it's curable. Okay, it's if we leave it untreated and symptoms start to appear, that we start having issues. Now, this may seem a little obvious, but please do not pick up wild animals, because even if you think it's with your bare hands, please do not pick up wild animals with your bare hands. Even if you think it's dead, it can still transmit something if you come in contact with its teeth. Also, a lot of animals will pretend to be dead, or when they're sickly, they kind of look dead. And then when we grab them is when they start acting, moving around. So please do not handle animals with your bare hands. Use containers, use very heavy duty gloves, because we want to prevent the transmission of rabies as best as possible. And really, when you're looking at ways to prevent transmission, looking at your house and making sure that they can't get in is going to be very, very important. So if you've ever had a bat in your house and you have no idea how they got in, that's when it's time to call a wildlife professional and have them inspect your house, because it does not take a very big hole for a bat to get inside. Even squirrels can get inside. And we want to make sure that we are vaccinating our pets for rabies. One, it's the law. So there is a good enough reason anyway, is you're legally required to vaccinate all of your domestic pets against rabies. But even if you have an animal that never leaves your house, let's say you have an indoor cat, the bats that we test that come back positive are bats that have been found inside a home. So having an indoor pet is no guarantee that they will never be exposed to rabies because of this. Anytime you see an animal displaying concerning symptoms, definitely give us a call, talk to us. We can always provide advice. Now, DuPage County Animal Services, our jurisdiction is unincorporated DuPage County. So if you live in a town or a city, then you're going to call your local law enforcement, because often they have their own animal control branch. So Naperville, Aurora, things like that, they have their own section, and that's their jurisdiction. So we are always able to provide advice and information over the phone. We can't always come out to your residence depending on where you live, depending on what jurisdiction you live in. Now, one of the reasons that rabies is so rare is that in the US, it is required by law to vaccinate our pets against rabies. In countries that do not have that legal requirement, they have much greater instances of human fatalities from rabies because their domestic pets are much more susceptible to contracting it and then spreading it to the human population. So making sure that your pet is vaccinated against rabies and registering that with DuPage County Animal Services is going to overall help keep our community healthier as well to prevent the transmission. Now, if you do have an encounter with wildlife or your pet does, and you're like, oh, it's fine, my pet is vaccinated against rabies, I don't have to do anything, keep in mind that no vaccine is 100% effective, and you definitely want to do some follow-up treatment. If you're in the backyard and you see your dog playing with a dead bat, that would be an instance to contact your vet and maybe get some booster shots going, okay? So vaccines are great, but they are not 100% effective, so we need to make sure that we are doing our due diligence, and it's always better to play it safe, all right? Now, a big call that we've been getting over the past couple months is, I found a baby something. What do I do? Well, for the most part, nothing. Baby animals are very, very hard to rehabilitate, and they're best left out with mom in the wild. Okay. So most of the time with wild animals, and this is true for birds, for bunnies, for deer, for raccoons, almost all of them, moms leave during the day and they go get food. And then they come back and visit babies from time to time to feed them. That's normal. That's completely natural. So when you find an orphaned baby animal, chances are it's not actually orphaned. Mom is just out shopping. Okay. And these moms are good moms. They're going to come back. There are some great ways that you can make sure that moms are coming back. Even just putting a circle of flour around like a baby bunny nest and then check the next day to see if that flower has been disturbed. That'll tell you if mom is visiting, okay? So let's say you have a baby bunny nest in your backyard. Try to secure it from any children or pets when you are out there, but otherwise leave them alone. Let mom come and do her thing. Typically, they're not going to be there very long either. Babies get independent very, very quickly. So for example, if you find a baby bird and it's just hanging out, this happened recently to me, it was just hanging out on the patio, but it was fully feathered. That's what's known as a fledgling. That's a bird learning how to be a bird. And I sat there and I watched it. And sure enough, mom came, gave it some food, gave it a little nudge, was trying to teach it how to fly. Okay. And when I opened the door, baby bird flew away. It was just learning how to be a bird. It was just hanging out with mom. Mom was hovering nearby watching. So if I had gone out and tried to capture that bird, I would have interfered in its natural behavior process. So we want to make sure that we know when these babies are independent. Typically, if they're, for birds, fully feathered, for animals, if their eyes are open, if their ears are up, if they don't appear to be in distress, the best place for them is to leave them in the wild. Now, if you notice a severe injury, broken bone, blood, something like that, if they are covered in fly eggs, it looks like little grains of rice, or if they are cold, wet, or crying incessantly, then something may have happened to mom. Okay, and that might be time to call. Willowbrook Wildlife can take in baby animals. Typically by this time of the year, they are at max capacity and they no longer have room to rehabilitate all of the animals. And sometimes what we need to keep in mind is nature is not always kind to its animals. And sometimes there's just nothing we can do. And it's heartbreaking and it's not fun. And sometimes we have to teach our children some hard lessons about nature, but that is how nature works. So we want to do our best to make sure that we are not harming or causing undue stress or injury to these animals, but understanding that sometimes by us intervening, we're going to cause more harm than good. So really quickly, because I want to give time for questions at the end, what can we do if we love wildlife, but we don't necessarily want them in our yards? Basically, we want to make sure we are not providing free food for them in dangerous areas. So near the highway, throwing an apple core out a car window, Yeah, it'll decompose eventually, but it's also going to attract wildlife to that very dangerous roadway. So we want to make sure that we are not feeding our wildlife at all, because it encourages them to seek out human behavior. We also want to make sure that we are not accidentally providing them free food. If you have fruit-bearing trees, gardens, make sure that we keep those areas cleaned up. Grills and barbecues, absolutely, we want to keep those clean so that the charred meat smell is not attracting animals. And we also do not want to provide our animals with free lodging. So if you have open areas, say under your porch, under your shed, using welded wire to block those areas off so that animals cannot take up residence is going to be one of your greatest ways to prevent a conflict, because animals do not see a shed and a tree differently. They just see nice, cozy, dark, warm place that they can live. So making sure that we are maintaining our home, keeping underbrush and dense weeds clear is going to make sure that these animals do not see our spaces as attractive places to live. Now, what do we do if we already have those animals living with us and we want them to move along? Well, we can use deterrents. So basically, you want to be the world's worst roommate. And lights, even Christmas lights in like underneath a porch or underneath a shed, sprinklers, security lights, things like that. Anything that's going to take away that feeling of comfort for these animals to encourage them to find someplace else that's more appropriate. Urine-soaked kitty litter is a great way to encourage animals to move along. That's predator smell. Now you can, if you have a cat, perfect, use that. Or you can soak the kitty litter yourself. Just please do so in the privacy of your own home and do not break any laws. Okay. Hazing, something we'll talk about here in just a second, is a great way to encourage animals to move along. You want them to know that your space is not an ideal space for them to live. The ammonia-soaked rags is a great way because that smell is really a deterrent. Vinegar is the same way. However, right now we really don't want to use the ammonia because potentially those spaces have babies. And if we're using the ammonia, it can harm those offspring that are too young to get out of that area. So wait until fall. Once nests are vacated, then you can prevent mom and dad from coming back, and we can block off those areas to secure them forever. The ammonia-soaked rags, the vinegar, the urine-soaked kitty litter, that's all going to have to be reapplied regularly to be effective. Now for hazing, this is good for coyotes. This is good for any animal, really. Just be loud, be big, and be obnoxious, okay? And you want to keep that up the entire time you see an animal on your property until they go away, until they're completely gone, because they can wait you out. They can decide, oh, well, let's see, she normally gives up at about 2 minutes, so I'm just gonna go hide in the bushes for 2 minutes and then come back. So anytime you see an animal, you're going to want to make a lot of noise. If you're in the kitchen, bang pots and pans outside, bring them with you. Bells, whistles, air horns, water sprayed in an arc. You don't want to aggravate the animal by spraying it at them or throwing things at the animal, but just in general, creating an atmosphere of chaos that an animal's not going to feel secure in, to encourage them to go away. If you are hazing and the coyote or fox is not moving, there's probably something wrong with that animal and it's time to call in a professional. This is true of any animal. If you are doing all sorts of things to get them to move along and they're not, it's time to call in the professionals. We also want to make sure that we are keeping our pets safe so that we are not enticing these animals, because especially for dogs, little dogs and cats, they can be seen as prey items. However, if we're there, we're going to be imposing enough to scare them away. So supervising our animals, keeping them on a shorter leash when we're out walking them, is going to deter any predator activity. And we highly recommend that cats should be kept indoor only. And really that's true for all small animals. Chickens, if you have chickens in your backyard, make sure that they have an enclosed coop that is nice and secure. And then those motion lights, anything else that can deter those animals is going to be great. Now, trapping is sometimes our go-to for getting rid of animal problems. However, we need to focus on removing the attraction, because if you just take out the animal and you've still left this nice cozy spot to live under your deck, another animal is going to move right in. You're going to have the exact same problem in a couple weeks. So we want to make sure that when we are doing trapping, that's a last resort. Use a professional wildlife trapper. They need to be certified, because it is illegal to trap and remove animals, wild animals, from our property. Okay, you need special permits for that. So you definitely need to call in a professional. And we never want to use poison, because those are very inhumane and can cause issues for other animals down the line, including our own pets and even our children. So we never want to use poison because of the risks involved there. And just remember that it is illegal to keep wild animals. Wild animals legally belong to the state of Illinois, and keeping them inside our house, even for a short time, is illegal. So you definitely want to be in contact with the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, or with Willowbrook Wildlife Center, or DuPage County Animal Services to get advice on how to handle any wildlife problems. All right, so if anybody has any questions, they can always reach out to me at humane.education@dupageco.org, or give me a call, 630-407-2808. Feel free to contact us at any time. This is why we're here, and we are always happy to help. I am going to turn it back over to Jody if she has anything she would like to say before we end.
What an impressive presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the first half, of course, for the second half as well. But the first half was a very enlightening series of information. That was just really great. For the second half, I have a question about,
Sure.
And I'm in and out because I'm here at the library, feral cats.
Wonderful. Yes. So if you have feral cats, you can do a couple different things. So we have a great organization in our community called Feral Fixers, and they will help you. It's called TNR, Trap, Neuter, Release.
Yeah.
So getting these cats in, getting them medical care, getting them spayed or neutered so they cannot increase the feral cat population, and then re-releasing them back somewhere where they will be safe and taken care of. So the idea for that is they actually do a little ear tipping. So they do a little slice of the ear so that they can identify feral cats in the future, and that we know that this cat has been spayed or neutered and is under someone's care. It's not just a stray cat. It is a cat that belongs in this general neighborhood.
Yeah.
And it's important, if you're going to be the person who keeps or maintains and watches over feral cats, that you are looking for their general well-being, that we're providing food in a safe manner. For example, I would never recommend just leaving food out all of the time, because that can attract wildlife. So meal times is going to be very, very important.
Okay.
And then if you do have feral cats that have litters, you can take those litters of kittens, we can separate them from mom at about the 5-week period, and we can socialize those kittens at DuPage County Animal Services through our great team of foster care providers and just our animal caretakers, so that those cats can then be eligible for adoption and can go out and be house cats. So that's something very important to know as well, that just because you see feral kittens doesn't mean that they are always going to be feral kittens. If we get them in that sweet spot when they can be separated from mom and still socialized, they can grow up to be very, very healthy, happy, socialized house cats.
That's great to know. Yeah. That is great. Another question I had was, so you see an animal in an emergency situation, do we call you first at DuPage Humane and then to a rescue service?
So that's a great question. It does Honestly, it depends on the situation. We
Yeah.
are always happy to guide you to the right direction. If we can't help, we can typically point you to where you need to go. As I mentioned, we are unincorporated DuPage for field calls. So we cannot typically go to someone's house and help with a wildlife situation for, say, in the town of Wheaton. It
Okay.
needs to be unincorporated areas.
Okay.
If And this is something that gets a little confusing, because if you have an injured animal on your property and you're, let's say, in unincorporated DuPage, but the animal can still move and get around, typically our advice there is going to be just let it be. If
Yeah.
it can move around, it's going to be better off on its own, because us trying to catch it and trap it and hunt it down is probably going to create more problems than just it being on its own.
Right. What if the animal is deceased? Who to call?
So for a deceased animal, if it's on a public roadway, that's typically going to be zoning or
Okay.
road maintenance.
Okay.
If it's on your property, the uncouth way to say it is, well, that can just go out with the regular garbage.
Okay.
That's not typically something that needs to be for called out. It's just, again, making sure that we aren't using our bare hands, that we are using protective equipment so that we minimize any potential contact of diseases.
So for your instance with unincorporated, but sort of a rule of thumb would be contact the village.
Yeah, contact your local police department, actually.
That's great. Okay.
If you see something really concerning, you can just call 911
Okay.
and they will be able to dispatch you to who you need to talk to.
Oh, good to know. Though that's because you hesitate you don't know who to call if it's emergency or non-emergency and so on. So that's great information. Are there slides available to send to folks if we need? Like I saw there was a lot of information on some of the slides. So
Yes.
by request.
Yeah, they can email me and I
Wonderful.
can have them available, and we can
Wonderful.
even include it with the recording. We can include a link to the slides in the recording.
That's just great.
Yep.
All right, so we have the first recording up and available on YouTube. And this one is streaming right now on YouTube as well. I double checked and kind of watched two screens at once for a while to make sure, but we are good to go. And I'm really looking forward to the remaining parts of this series. This was an incredible presentation. Thank you for your hard work.
No problem. Thanks. And I can't wait to see you guys next week.
See you soon.